Have you ever carried an entire workplace on your shoulders while someone else took the credit? Comment below where you're watching from, and tell me what part of the story you're on. At 6:10 a.m. on a Thursday, I sat alone at my dining table, staring at a half-finished protein bar and a mountain of unresolved client messages that scrolled longer than a pharmacy receipt. My headset had practically become a permanent accessory, molded to my ear after years of early calls, late calls, and crisis calls no one else wanted to own. My third call of the morning was with a client in Berlin who insisted our team had failed them, despite the fact that nothing had actually gone wrong. I soothed the concern, clarified the facts, and resolved the imaginary emergency the way I always did, quietly and effectively. 10 minutes later, our support hub in Cebu messaged me about a backlog of onboarding forms stranded inside a workflow system that someone, somewhere, insisted was future-proof. I repaired that too. Just another invisible victory. For nearly 5 years, I was the silent engine keeping our largest service contract upright, polished, and running like a machine built by someone who never slept. I didn't crave credit. I didn't chase attention. I simply delivered while the rest of the company buzzed around, juggling trendy management jargon like confetti. While others scrambled through endless meetings and colorful slide decks, I was the one extinguishing real operational disasters using determination, diplomacy, and a very worn-out sticky note pad. Our founder, back when he still actually led the company, once called me his anchor with strategy. He'd said it in front of the entire executive panel. I laughed at the time, but I understood what he meant. I kept the whole program from drifting into chaos. And if you're nodding because you've ever been that person who holds everything together, maybe tap the like button, or even subscribe. It genuinely helps the small team who brings these stories to life. Anyway, back to the unraveling. Quiet competence works beautifully, until someone loud decides volume equals leadership. That someone arrived in the form of Mason. He stepped into the company like he'd been fired from a magazine photo shoot, perfect smile, sockless loafers, and a spreadsheet obsession that bordered on theatrical. His father, an old friend of the founder, had maneuvered Mason into the role of vice president of operations before he could even spell the word governance. I first met him in the hallway. He was trying to sync his phone to the office printer and said, "You must be Laura. I hear you practically are this account." He smiled. I could tell it wasn't a compliment, it was a warning wrapped in charm. At first, he was all handshakes and awkward, ill-timed fist bumps. But that veneer cracked fast. Within a month, meetings I had run for years suddenly no longer included me. Client communications went out without review, ignoring the contract's actual boundaries as if reality were optional. Process changes appeared overnight, announced with glossy language but no operational grounding. He would copy me on announcements that drastically affected my team, then conveniently disappear when I asked for clarification. One day, Mason referred to my long-standing workflows as legacy clutter in a company-wide chat channel. I wasn't tagged. I was simply the punchline. Worse, people started nodding along, not because they understood him, but because he had a title, a polished jawline, and a slide deck that used the word synergy in a font size large enough to require its own seat at the table. While he strutted through the organization with confidence like it was cologne, I kept doing the real work. Managing clients, solving crises, proofreading technical documentation, and safeguarding deliverables line by line. My team saw what was happening, but leadership insisted we align with Mason's transformation strategy. Transformation? More like taking a stable, revenue-generating operation and tossing it into a blender labeled cost reduction experiment. I didn't argue. Not yet. I observed. I documented. I let him build his house of cards. When he described my workflow as bloated, I smiled politely and nodded, because some people don't need to be challenged. They simply need room to expose their own mistakes. But by the third time I was quietly removed from a project meeting, the unease settled into my chest like a whisper telling me I was being written out. The unraveling didn't happen in one dramatic explosion. It happened the way frost creeps across a window, quiet, delicate, and almost beautiful if it weren't so destructive. The first real fracture showed during a client escalation call. A major account. One I had managed for years with precision and late-night diplomacy. Mason barged into the meeting late, waving his tablet like some sort of ceremonial flag. "Team, I'll take it from here," he said, as if I were an intern he'd caught stealing pens. The client raised an eyebrow. I lowered mine. He spoke quickly, too quickly. He overpromised. He dismissed concerns that were not dismissible. He guaranteed turnaround times that ignored the actual capacity of our team. And when the client pressed for specifics, he volleyed every question back to me with a forced laugh. "Laura has all the details," he'd say. I did, of course. Because details mattered to me. Because this contract mattered to me. After the call, I followed him into the hallway. Not to confront him, but to clarify next steps. "Great energy, right?" he said, adjusting his watch like it had survived a battle. "We need to adjust the service timeline you promised," I replied. "No, we don't," he said. "Mason, we literally don't have the headcount. Laura." He paused. Smiled. "Too wide. You focus too much on limitations. I focus on vision." The only vision he had was the one where someone else cleaned up the fallout. 2 weeks later, his glossy promises began to rot around the edges. The Berlin client escalated again, furious this time. Timelines weren't being met, because they couldn't be met. And guess who was pulled into the call to salvage everything? Me. While Mason took credit for every smooth moment, he deflected every consequence like he had an invisible shield labeled, "Not my department." He didn't have a department. He had an ego. But here's the thing. When someone incompetent is given authority, they don't just damage processes. They damage people. The slow exclusion became deliberate. Meetings removed from my calendar. Approvals rerouted without explanation. Documentation I authored suddenly credited to his strategic insights. Teams told to follow new operational structures that only existed in his imagination. My workload doubled while my visibility halved. And every time I sorted out one of his messes, he stepped forward to declare the solution part of his transformation initiative. The worst moment wasn't even public. It was a one-on-one review in a small glass conference room, the kind where you can hear the air conditioning whisper louder than your own pulse. "I've been evaluating your performance," he said casually, tapping his pen against his teeth. "Your output is good, obviously. But your attitude is rigid." Rigid. A word people use when a woman has boundaries. "You need to align with my direction, Laura. Not work around it." He didn't want alignment. He wanted obedience. He wanted credit for work he didn't understand. And he wanted me quiet. That day when I walked out of the room, something in me shifted. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I didn't spiral the way I had quietly spiraled months earlier when the first signs of sabotage appeared. I simply inhaled. And with that breath I recognized something important. I wasn't losing value. He was losing stability. Because you can replace a workflow. You can replace a process. You can even replace a team. But you cannot replace institutional memory, earn trust, or the quiet force of someone who holds the operation together. And Mason had just declared war on the one person keeping his entire illusion from collapsing. The breaking point arrived on a Wednesday, not dramatic, not poetic, just an ordinary Wednesday wrapped in quiet betrayal. At 9:12 a.m., my phone buzzed with a notification from our internal portal. Role alignment update, effective immediately. I clicked it, and there it was, my responsibilities, the ones I had built from the ground up, reassigned. Not to a team. Not to a department. To him. Every metric, every project, every client-facing workflow I had managed for half a decade now listed under Mason's operational command, as if he had invented the entire system. He hadn't even told me. He didn't need to. People like him don't warn you. They announce you. My name wasn't removed entirely. It was tucked beneath his in small gray font labeled supporting role. Supporting. As if I were some part-time consultant brought in to carry his coffee. My office door was half open when he leaned inside, smiling like a man who had just solved a puzzle he didn't understand. "Saw the update," he said. "Yes," I replied. "Good. This structure will streamline things. You'll still do what you do best, execution. I'll handle strategy." Execution. Strategy. Funny words, considering he didn't know which systems connected to which teams, or how our contracts were actually structured. If you need clarity, come to me first, he added. Not team. Not leadership. Me. He wanted ownership. Not of the work, of me. That afternoon a fire broke out. Not literal flames, though part of me might have preferred that. A regulatory report was overdue. Travel reimbursements miscategorized. Client tickets unresolved for days because Mason had rerouted everything through a system he didn't know how to configure. He blamed the team for not adapting fast enough. He blamed me for not anticipating his changes. But the truth was embarrassingly simple. He didn't know what he was doing. By evening, we were drowning in problems that didn't exist before he arrived. And while the building emptied out floor by floor, I stayed behind like I always did, because crisis didn't care about business hours. At 7:46 p.m., he strolled past my desk, coat slung over his shoulder. Don't stay too late, he said lightly. We need you fresh tomorrow. Big presentation. Big presentation. His. The one built almost entirely on data I collected, reports I wrote, and processes he had spent weeks dismantling. I didn't respond. I just watched him walk away, confident, clueless, and certain the universe worked in his favor. But the universe is patient. And incompetence has a timer. The next morning, the leadership meeting began at 10 a.m. sharp. I dialed in remotely because I was still working through the mess he'd left the night before. The screen filled with faces, from New York, from Dubai, from Singapore. This was the presentation Mason had been bragging about for weeks. He clicked to the first slide. It took less than 30 seconds to realize he hadn't checked anything. The numbers were wrong. The charts mislabeled. The KPIs outdated. The contractual obligations reversed, literally reversed. He was presenting a fantasy built on buzzwords and borrowed work he didn't understand, and leadership noticed. Mason, one director asked, these figures contradict the compliance report from last quarter. Who validated this data? My team, he said confidently. He meant me. Another executive frowned. Mason, the workflow here violates 3 client SLAs. Did Laura review this? He hesitated. I felt it through the screen like static. She contributed, but the strategy is mine, he said. And that was his mistake. Because the next slide froze. Completely. A full error message across the screen. He panicked visibly. Clicking. Refreshing. Muttering. And suddenly every leader watching understood the truth. He wasn't a strategist. He was a performer who had forgotten his lines. Laura, the COO said, can you walk us through the correct operational numbers? He asked me, not him. And in that moment I realized something. They always knew who the real backbone was. They just needed to see him fall apart to admit it. The virtual room went quiet. Not the gentle kind of quiet. The kind that drops when a mask finally slips. My heart should have been racing. But it wasn't. It was steady, almost calm. Because I had been preparing for this moment without realizing it. Yes, I replied. I can walk everyone through the accurate numbers. I shared my screen. My real dashboard. Clean. Updated. Precise. Not a single mislabeled metric in sight. The directors leaned in, not politely, not out of courtesy, but with genuine interest. Because clarity commands attention. I outlined the real performance trends, the true project statuses, the actual client expectations. Then I detailed, calmly, without emotion, exactly how the new bottlenecks had formed. Not an accusation. Not a complaint. Just facts. Facts are powerful when someone else relies on illusions. These issues emerged after the recent restructuring, I explained. Specifically, after workflow approvals were centralized under a single point without operational review. I didn't say his name. I didn't need to. The COO nodded slowly. The kind of nod people give when they've been suspecting something for weeks. Thank you, Laura, he said. We'll need to revisit this restructuring. Your clarity is appreciated. Mason's face stiffened. The kind of stiffness a person gets when they realize charm can't save them anymore. After the call ended, my inbox lit up. A message from a director. Thank you for stepping in. Another from compliance. Your documentation saved us from another escalation. One from HR. Please schedule time for a role review. Role review. Interesting timing. Mason didn't message me. Of course he didn't. He stormed into my office 20 minutes later instead. What was that? He snapped. You made me look unprepared. You made you look unprepared, I replied. Simple. Clean. True. You could have covered for the errors. I did, every day for the last 3 months, I said. Today wasn't my presentation. He opened his mouth, closed it, then pointed a finger at me like that finger had authority. I am your VP. Then act like it, I replied softly. Softness can cut deeper than shouting. That evening, I got a calendar invite marked Confidential, Organizational Transition. My name was first on the list. Mason's wasn't. The meeting the next morning was short. The company wasn't firing him, not yet. Politics rarely move quickly. But they were stripping him of the authority he never deserved. And they were giving me something instead. We'd like you to take over operational leadership of the account. Formally, the COO said. This aligns with the capability you've consistently demonstrated. Consistently demonstrated. Not suddenly discovered. Because real work speaks even when we don't. It wasn't a promotion born of ambition. It was the correction of a mistake. When I walked out of that meeting, people looked at me differently. Not with surprise, with recognition. And Mason? He walked past me in the hallway, eyes lowered, holding a box of his things. They hadn't fired him. But they had relocated him to a department where he couldn't break anything important. A decorative role. Perfect for someone who only excelled at being seen. I didn't celebrate. I didn't smirk. I didn't feel victorious. I felt clear. Because sometimes the win isn't applause or revenge. Sometimes the win is simply stepping back into your own light. People assume the end of a story like mine should feel triumphant. A slow-motion walk, a dramatic soundtrack, a symbolic turning of the tables. But real life isn't a movie. Real life is quieter than that. After the reorganization, my days didn't suddenly become easier. The workload didn't magically shrink. The clients didn't stop needing late-night reassurance. What changed was the space around me. It was as if the air had been rearranged. More breathable. More mine. One morning, I walked into the office and noticed something strange. People weren't coming to me with panic in their eyes. They were coming with respect in their voices. Laura, can you review this plan? Laura, can you advise on the workflow? Laura, leadership wants your insight on the restructure. Not because I demanded it. Not because I fought for recognition. But because the truth had finally become undeniable. A week later, I passed the smaller office Mason had been moved to. His door was half open. He was alone. For a moment, I felt the tiniest flicker of sympathy. Not because he deserved it, but because failure is a lonely place. Then I remembered the meetings he excluded me from. The work he stole. The quiet ways he tried to unmake everything I had built. And the sympathy faded into something softer. Understanding. People like him burn bright and fast. People like me burn steady and long. There's room in the world for both. But only one of us was built to last. The real turning point didn't happen in a boardroom. Or a meeting. Or a confrontation. It happened the night I stayed late again. Months after everything had been resolved. Not because of crisis. Not because someone messed up. Not because I had to. But because I was finally building something of my own choosing. Not cleaning up someone else's wreckage. And I realized I wasn't surviving anymore. I was leading. If you've ever been the quiet force behind everything, if you've ever held a team, a department, or a whole operation together while someone else got the credit, if you've ever been underestimated, sidelined, or overlooked, this part is for you. Your work is not invisible. Not to the people who matter. Not to the outcomes that depend on you. Not to the story you're building brick by brick. Sometimes it takes time. Sometimes it takes a crack in the facade. Sometimes it takes the collapse of someone else's illusion. But eventually the truth arrives. And when it does, you don't have to shout. You don't have to fight. You don't have to prove anything. You simply have to step into the space you've owned all along. This was my story, my unraveling, my reclaiming, my quiet victory. And if it resonated with you, don't forget to like the video, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe for more stories that remind you your strength is seen, even when others try to hide it. Thank you for listening. If this story hit home, let me know in the comments. Where are you watching from? And what part spoke to you the most?